The mysterious arrival. On a quiet evening, the sky above the small town of Rockwood was clear, dotted with stars. But as the night grew deeper, something strange began to happen. The stars above seemed to shift, and a loud noise pierced the silence. Sergeant Jack Harris, a young soldier stationed at a nearby military base, was on a routine patrol when he heard the sound. At first, he thought it was just another aircraft passing by, but the sound grew louder and more distinct. Suddenly, a bright light flashed across the sky, and Jack stopped in his tracks. His heart raced, and he squinted up at the sky. It wasn't a plane or any of the usual flying crafts he was used to seeing. This was something entirely different. A shape, small and sleek, was falling rapidly toward Earth. The object streaked through the atmosphere, its bright trail like a comet that was too fast to be natural. Jack's mind raced. What was it? Was it a meteor, or something else? His curiosity got the best of him. Jack immediately radioed in to report the sighting, but there was no time to wait for instructions. The object was coming down fast, and it was going to land very close. He had to investigate. Jack quickly hopped into his military jeep and sped towards the coordinates of the object's descent. The ground rumbled as the object crashed into the forest just outside town. Dust and smoke billowed into the night sky, making it almost impossible to see. Jack's instincts told him to be cautious, but his sense of duty urged him to approach the wreckage. The jeep skidded to a stop as Jack reached the edge of the forest. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped out into the thick undergrowth. The air was cool, and the faint sound of rustling leaves mixed with the soft crackling of the debris from the crash. As he moved forward, Jack's heart pounded in his chest. What could this be? Was this some sort of secret military project, or something far beyond anything he could ever imagine? As he drew closer, Jack could see the wreckage more clearly. It was an object unlike anything he had ever seen before. The craft was small, no bigger than a compact car, but its design was sleek, almost organic in nature, with smooth curves and strange symbols etched into its surface. It had the look of something alien, and a chill ran down Jack's spine. He knew this wasn't from Earth. The craft was silent now, the faint glow of its broken hull flickering like a dying ember. Jack approached slowly, cautious but determined to uncover the truth. As he rounded the side of the ship, something caught his eye. There, among the wreckage, was a small figure lying motionless on the ground. It was small, much smaller than a human, and at first glance, Jack thought it was an animal. But as he moved closer, he saw something that made his heart race. It was a woman. She was barely a few inches tall, her fragile body laying among the wreckage. Her features were unlike anything Jack had seen before. She had smooth, silver-blue skin that shimmered under the moonlight, and her eyes were large and bright, reflecting the stars above. Her hair was long and silken, with an iridescent glow that seemed almost unnatural. She looked delicate, fragile, and yet there was something in her expression that seemed both wise and fearful at the same time. Jack knelt down beside her, his breath catching in his throat. He had never seen anything like this before, and the reality of the situation began to settle in. He wasn't just looking at a wrecked spacecraft. He was looking at an alien being from another world, and she was hurt. His mind raced. Should he help her? Could she even understand him? What was she doing here on Earth? But Jack didn't hesitate. His training as a soldier had taught him to act, not freeze. He gently reached out a hand, his voice soft but firm. "Hey, are you okay?" Jack said, unsure if she could hear him. But as soon as his fingers touched her small form, her eyes snapped open. She blinked several times, clearly disoriented. For a moment, she seemed unable to move, her tiny body trembling from the shock of the crash. Jack pulled his hand back, not wanting to scare her, but the tiny woman's gaze locked onto his, and Jack saw something in her eyes that he couldn't explain. Fear, yes, but also a sense of recognition, as though she understood who he was, even though they couldn't communicate. She slowly raised a small hand, as if trying to signal to him, but her voice was a soft, almost inaudible whisper. "Help me." Her words were so quiet that Jack wasn't sure if he had imagined them, but there was no mistaking the fear in her voice. The alien woman was in trouble, and Jack couldn't leave her like this. He had no idea how she had come to Earth or what her presence meant, but in that moment, Jack knew he had to do whatever it took to help her. The story of how a tiny alien woman arrived on Earth had just begun, and Jack was now caught in a mystery far bigger than anything he had ever imagined. He had to protect her, even if he had no idea what dangers might be lurking ahead. The night had only just started, and already it had turned into something Jack would never forget. With the alien woman's fate in his hands, Jack made a silent vow to uncover the truth behind the mysterious arrival. A dangerous first encounter. As the eerie glow from the crashed spacecraft began to fade, the forest seemed to grow darker, the shadows creeping in around Jack. His mind raced, trying to process the situation unfolding before him. There she was, a tiny alien woman, lying helplessly on the ground, her fragile form barely moving. He had to act quickly, but the uncertainty of it all made him hesitate for just a moment. Jack knew that every second counted, yet he couldn't help but feel a wave of wonder and disbelief. He had seen combat, dealt with emergencies, and faced danger countless times, but nothing had prepared him for this. An alien being, clearly from another world, stranded in the middle of nowhere. He took a deep breath, shook off his disbelief, and bent closer to the tiny woman. His large hands, steady but cautious, hovered above her, unsure of how to handle someone so fragile. He noticed that she wasn't unconscious anymore. Her large, shimmering eyes blinked rapidly as though adjusting to the sudden light of his flashlight. For a brief moment, their gazes met, and Jack's heart skipped a beat. The tiny woman's body twitched, and she attempted to push herself upright, but her small limbs were weak, and she immediately fell back. Jack's instinct to help surged again, and he reached down gently, lifting her with the utmost care, cradling her in his palms. She was as light as a feather, her small form trembling in his grasp. "Shay, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you," Jack whispered, trying to offer some comfort, though he wasn't sure if she understood him. The alien woman didn't speak, but her bright eyes watched him, a mix of confusion and fear in her gaze. Jack noticed something strange about her. There was no immediate sense of hostility, but instead a strange energy surrounding her, something both delicate and powerful, as if she was a creature out of a storybook. Her skin shimmered like liquid silver, her clothes made from an unknown material that gleamed faintly under the moonlight. Despite her fragile appearance, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary encounter. She was no mere survivor of a crash. There was something much deeper at play here, something that Jack couldn't quite put his finger on. As Jack carefully held her in his hands, the alien woman's small voice broke the silence, this time clearer than before. "Not safe here." Her voice was soft, but there was an unmistakable urgency in her words. Jack stiffened. "What do you mean? What's not safe?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm, his military training kicking in. He needed answers. He needed to know who she was and why she was here, but she didn't respond to his question. Instead, her eyes darted around nervously, scanning the dark forest around them. Jack's instincts screamed at him. Something was coming. Suddenly, the air shifted. A strange hum filled the silence, vibrating in the air like a low-frequency sound that Jack could feel deep in his bones. The trees above them rustled, but it wasn't the usual wind. This felt different, unnatural. The tiny woman tensed in his hands, her small body shaking as though she felt the same unsettling presence. Before Jack could react, a flicker of light appeared in the distance, growing brighter and larger by the second. It wasn't just the normal moonlight. It was something far more dangerous. In the blink of an eye, a ship, much larger than the one that had crashed, appeared above the treetops, casting a menacing shadow over them. It wasn't a ship from Earth, Jack's heart raced as he took in the dark, imposing silhouette against the starry sky. The craft had sharp edges and strange markings, almost like the one that had crashed. But this one looked far more advanced, much more dangerous. The alien woman gasped, her tiny body curling into Jack's hand in an instinctive response to the incoming threat. Jack's mind raced. Who were these people? Why were they after her? He could hear the ship's engine now, a deep mechanical roar that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. It wasn't just the sound of an aircraft. It was the sound of an enemy, someone who would stop at nothing to find her. And now, it seemed like they were closing in on her position. The alien woman whispered frantically, They will take me. They will hurt you." Before Jack could think, the craft hovered just above the treetops, its massive shape looming over them. The alien woman looked up at it with a mixture of fear and resignation, her body stiff in Jack's hand. Her voice trembled as she spoke again. "They want me. I am not safe." A beam of light shot down from the ship, illuminating the ground in an intense, blinding white. Jack shielded his eyes, but the force of the light was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It felt like the light was alive, scanning, searching, pulling at the very air around them. It was powerful, and it was only a matter of time before they would be found. "Come on, we have to move," Jack shouted, his voice urgent, his grip tightening around the tiny woman. He couldn't waste any more time. If they were going to escape, they needed to act fast. With the alien woman still cradled in his hand, Jack darted into the forest, moving quickly but carefully, trying to stay out of sight from the ship's glaring light. The trees offered some cover, but the alien craft was relentless. It was scanning, searching for them, and Jack knew that they didn't have long before it would find them. As they ran, Jack's mind raced. Who were these people? What did they want with the alien woman? Why was she so afraid of them? In that moment, Jack realized something. This wasn't just an ordinary encounter. Something much bigger was at stake, and no matter how dangerous the situation was, he had no choice but to protect her and uncover the truth. The danger was only just beginning. Unexpected bond. The forest was alive with sound as Jack sprinted through the underbrush, the alien woman trembling in his hand. His breath came in ragged gasps as he pushed himself harder, his mind racing with questions he had no answers to. Behind him, the hum of the enemy ship grew fainter, but Jack knew it was only a matter of time before they picked up his trail again. The only thing that mattered now was finding somewhere safe. After what felt like an eternity, Jack finally slowed, his eyes scanning the dark woods. He had reached a small clearing, a place he had once used for training exercises during his early days in the military. It was a quiet, secluded spot, perfect for laying low. He crouched down, his knees aching, and gently set the tiny alien woman down on the ground beside him. As Jack adjusted his position, he noticed how fragile she seemed, her small form trembling with fear, her silver-blue skin glimmering faintly in the moonlight. Her wide eyes were fixed on him, but there was a new softness to them now, as if she were seeing him not as a threat, but as someone who might help her. Jack felt a strange, unexpected wave of sympathy for her. Despite her small size and alien features, there was something remarkably human about her. He had no idea where she came from or what her purpose was on Earth, but in that moment, he realized that whatever dangers lay ahead, he couldn't just leave her to face them alone. "You're safe here," Jack whispered, kneeling down beside her. He wasn't sure if she understood his words, but he spoke them anyway, as if reassuring himself as much as her. The tiny woman looked up at him, her large eyes filled with a mix of confusion and gratitude. Her tiny mouth parted slightly, and for a moment, Jack thought she might speak again. But instead, she simply nodded, almost imperceptibly, as if to acknowledge his gesture of kindness. Her gaze held his for a long time, and Jack couldn't help but feel a strange connection between them. It wasn't just the shared danger or the desperate need to survive. It was something deeper, something unspoken. Jack had dealt with countless people over the years, but there was something about this tiny alien woman that made him want to protect her, something that transcended the boundaries of species and language. "Don't worry," Jack said, his voice softer this time. "I won't let them get you." The woman's eyes flickered with something like hope, and she extended one tiny hand toward him, reaching out in a gesture that felt like a silent plea. Jack hesitated for a moment, then reached out and gently took her hand, his fingers barely making contact with her delicate skin. It was a simple touch, but to both of them, it felt like something more. A bond, unexpected and fragile, had begun to form. Jack felt a rush of warmth, as though the tiny woman's trust in him was a lifeline he hadn't known he needed. It wasn't just about saving her anymore. It was about protecting her, understanding her, and doing whatever he could to help her find peace in this unfamiliar world. As Jack looked down at the tiny woman in his hand, he realized how small she truly was, both in stature and in the vulnerability she carried with her. And yet, despite her size, there was a quiet strength about her, something that made Jack believe she wasn't as helpless as she seemed. She had come from a distant world, survived a crash, and now, despite all odds, had managed to make it to Earth. She was a survivor, and Jack wasn't about to underestimate her. But Jack wasn't blind to the reality of their situation. They weren't safe here. They might have escaped the enemy ship for now, but it wouldn't be long before they were found again. Jack had to keep moving, had to find a way to help her, and fast. "What's your name?" Jack asked, his voice tentative but genuine. He wanted to know her story, wanted to understand who she was and where she came from. But the alien woman only looked at him, her large eyes full of sorrow and confusion. She didn't speak, but the way she held his gaze made Jack feel as though she was trying to communicate something deeper, something beyond words. It was then that Jack realized something else. She might not be able to speak his language, but she was telling him something. Through her eyes, through the way she reached out to him. In her silence, there was a message. She was scared, but she trusted him. And that trust, fragile as it was, meant more to him than he could ever explain. Jack stood up slowly, careful not to disturb her, and looked around the clearing. The woods were quiet now, but Jack knew the calm wouldn't last. He had to find shelter, a place to hide, and fast. He glanced back down at the tiny woman, her figure so small in the vastness of the forest. It was hard to believe she could have survived such a journey, let alone a crash landing on Earth. But the bond between them was undeniable, and Jack knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. With a final look at the alien woman, Jack turned and began scanning the area, his mind racing for a plan. He had no idea what they were up against or who was chasing them, but one thing was clear: Jack wasn't going to let her down. He would protect her, no matter the cost. The bond between them, though new and fragile, was something neither of them could ignore, and as they prepared to face the dangers ahead, Jack couldn't help but wonder what this unexpected connection would lead to. Would it be enough to overcome the enemies closing in on them? Or would the challenges ahead prove too much for them both? Only time would tell. But for now, Jack knew one thing for certain. He wasn't alone in this fight, and neither was she. The aliens struggled. The night was growing colder as Jack crouched by a small fire he had built in the clearing. The glow from the flames flickered across the alien woman's delicate form, casting strange shadows on the ground. She sat there, still and silent, her large eyes fixed on the fire, but there was a tension in her posture. Her earlier sense of fear had not dissipated. It had merely shifted into something deeper, something almost sorrowful. Jack watched her carefully. He had been trying to think of their next move, but something about the way she sat, so small, so fragile, pulled at his heart. It was as if her mind was elsewhere, lost in thoughts of her own. Her lips were pressed together tightly, her eyes distant, and Jack could see that she was struggling with something far beyond the immediate danger they faced. He had been giving her space, hoping she would open up to him in her own time, but it was clear now that there was more to her story than he could have imagined. Jack couldn't just leave it at this. He had to understand what had happened, what brought her here, and why she was so afraid of the enemies who were undoubtedly searching for her. Jack shifted closer, trying to soften the tension in the air. "Hey," he said gently, his voice calm and steady. "I know you're scared, but I'm here. You don't have to face this alone." The alien woman's eyes flickered toward him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of the crackling fire and the rustling of the trees in the night. She was hesitant, as if the words she needed to say were trapped inside. But at last, she spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "The war, the destruction, my world." Jack leaned in closer, trying to catch every word. Her voice trembled with grief, and Jack could hear the weight of sorrow in it. He waited patiently, knowing that this moment, however painful it might be, was crucial. I was sent," she continued, her voice faltering, "to find safety, to escape. They were coming for us. A warlord, a conqueror. He destroyed everything. My people, my home, my world. It's all gone now." Her eyes closed briefly, as if the memories were too painful to face. "I was supposed to be the last hope, to save us. But now," her voice trailed off, and the words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Jack felt a lump form in his throat as he processed what she had said. Her planet, her entire world was gone, destroyed by someone seeking power and control. She was the last survivor, sent to find refuge, but she had ended up here, on Earth, crash-landed and hunted. The gravity of the situation hit him like a punch to the stomach. This tiny woman, this fragile alien, was carrying the weight of her entire species' extinction on her shoulders. "I'm sorry," Jack said quietly, not sure how else to comfort her. The words seemed so small compared to the enormity of what she had been through. The alien woman's eyes met his again, her gaze piercing and full of a sorrow that Jack couldn't begin to understand. She had lost everything, her people, her home, and now she was in a foreign land, far from everything she had known. Jack couldn't help but feel a deep sense of helplessness. He could protect her from the immediate danger, but how could he help her heal from the devastation she had suffered? She sat in silence for a long while, and Jack let her be, not wanting to push her further. She needed time to process her grief, just as Jack needed time to figure out what to do next. But deep down, Jack knew something important had shifted in that moment. The alien woman had trusted him with her pain, her story. And though he didn't know what the future held, he felt a sense of duty to her, a responsibility to help her rebuild, or at least protect what little was left of her world. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she spoke again. "They're coming for me," she said, her voice stronger now, but filled with the same fear. "The warlord, he will stop at nothing to find me. He won't rest until he has me." Her eyes darkened with resolve. "I can't go back. I can't let him use me for his power. If I do, everything will be lost." Jack could feel the urgency in her words. The enemies were closing in, and they weren't going to stop until they had her. The firelight flickered wildly as if the forest itself could sense the growing danger. The enemy wasn't just a threat to her. They were a threat to everything she stood for, everything she had left. Jack clenched his jaw, the determination in his eyes hardening. He knew that he couldn't let them win, couldn't let her fall into their hands. He had to protect her, not just from physical harm, but from the devastation that would come if she was captured again. "We'll stop them," Jack said firmly. "I won't let them take you." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with something new, hope, maybe, or maybe it was the smallest spark of trust. Jack wasn't sure, but he could see that she believed him. She had no reason to, not really, but in that moment, the bond between them felt real, as if they had become something more than just an alien and a human. They had become allies, united by a shared cause, and it was a cause Jack wasn't going to let go of. Together, they would fight. Together, They would stand against the warlord who had destroyed her world. And no matter the cost, Jack knew that he would do whatever it took to protect her and to help her find a way to rebuild what was lost. A plan to save her. The forest around them had grown silent, almost eerily so. The fire crackled softly as Jack stared into the flames, lost in thought. The alien woman, her tiny form nestled in the crook of his palm, remained still. She hadn't said much since their last conversation, but Jack could feel the weight of her presence, her need to escape, to survive, and to never return to the nightmare she had fled from. Jack knew the time for talking was over. It was time to act. His mind raced as he mentally mapped out the options. The warlord and his forces were undoubtedly closing in, and soon they would be too close for comfort. They couldn't stay in the forest forever. The enemy ship had already scouted the area once, and there was no way Jack would risk staying in one spot for too long. But there was hope. Jack was no ordinary soldier. He had trained for situations like this. His experience with high-risk missions, covert operations, and tactical strikes had taught him how to adapt, how to think on his feet. And now he would use everything he knew to protect the alien woman and keep her from the horrors of the past. He owed her that much. "We need to move," Jack said softly, his voice steady. The alien woman shifted slightly in his palm, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "I can't hide forever. They will find me," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but there was an undeniable sense of defeat in her words. She had known her fate for far too long. Running, hiding, always on the run from the enemy she couldn't escape. Jack's fingers tightened around her, offering comfort without crushing her fragile form. He understood her fear. He understood that she had lived a life of constant flight, constantly evading the grasp of the warlord who sought to control her, who saw her as nothing more than a tool to further his power. "We won't hide," Jack replied, determination hardening his voice. "We're not running. I'll make sure of that." The alien woman's eyes flickered toward him, and for the first time, Jack saw something like a spark of hope in her gaze. The weight of her despair was still there, but in that moment, she seemed to believe him. Jack pulled out a small weathered notebook from his backpack and began to sketch quickly on the pages. The firelight cast a soft glow over the paper, and Jack's eyes darted between the drawing and the alien woman, who was watching him with a curious, almost wary expression. "We need to get you to the coordinates I've marked here," Jack said, pointing to the map he had drawn. "It's an old military base about 40 miles east of here. It's been abandoned for years, but it's got a perimeter that should keep us hidden long enough for us to make a real plan. It's our best shot." The alien woman looked at the map, her tiny fingers tracing the lines Jack had drawn. Though her expression remained uncertain, she seemed to understand, at least in part, what Jack was suggesting. Her gaze lifted to meet his once more. "But they will track us," she said quietly, her voice filled with fear. "They have technology that can find me anywhere." Jack felt a pang of doubt, but he pushed it aside. He couldn't afford to entertain any thoughts of failure. Not now. Not when they had a chance, however slim, to make it out alive. "I know," Jack said, his tone grim but resolute. "They'll be looking for us, but they won't know where to look. Not if we stay off the main roads and keep moving through the woods. We've got a head start, and that's all we need. I'll keep you safe." The alien woman didn't respond immediately. Instead, she seemed to contemplate his words, her brow furrowed in thought. Finally, she nodded, ever so slightly, and Jack knew that she understood. Jack had been right about one thing. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about giving her a chance at freedom. A chance to escape the claws of the warlord who had destroyed her world. The plan was risky. There were no guarantees, no promises that they would make it to the military base safely. But Jack didn't have a choice. He had to try. "All right," she said, her voice stronger now, though still tinged with apprehension. "I will follow your lead." Jack exhaled, a mixture of relief and renewed determination flooding through him. He quickly packed away his map and closed his notebook, then glanced at the alien woman. She was still small, fragile, but there was something fierce in her eyes now. Something that told him she was ready to fight, ready to survive. And for the first time since their meeting, Jack felt like they stood a real chance. "We leave at first light," Jack said. "We keep moving. Stay quiet. Stay hidden. And whatever happens, we don't stop. We make it to that base, and we'll figure out what to do from there." The alien woman nodded again, her delicate form shifting slightly as if preparing herself for the journey ahead. Jack could see the fear still there in her eyes. But beneath it, there was a flicker of something else, a glimmer of trust. She was putting her faith in him, just as he had vowed to protect her. And as Jack looked at her, something inside him shifted. He wasn't just protecting a small alien woman anymore. He was protecting the last hope of an entire world. The last hope of a species that had been lost to the cruelty of a warlord's ambition. This was bigger than either of them. They were fighting not just for survival, but for the chance to rebuild, to reclaim what had been taken from her people. With a firm resolve, Jack stood up, checking his gear one last time. The night was quiet now, but he knew that silence wouldn't last long. The warlord's forces were relentless, and if they were going to have any chance of success, they had to keep moving. They had to keep ahead of the enemy. The alien woman stood in his palm, her tiny body brimming with determination despite the overwhelming odds. Together, they would face whatever dangers came their way. Together, they would fight to survive. And as the first rays of dawn began to pierce through the trees, Jack knew one thing for sure. The battle had only just begun. The final test. The cold morning air was thick with tension as Jack and the alien woman moved silently through the woods. Every step they took was deliberate, calculated. There was no room for mistakes. The military base, the hope for their survival, was still miles away. But Jack couldn't help but feel the growing weight of the danger pressing down on them. They had no time to waste, no time to second-guess their plan. Every minute they were on the move. The enemy was getting closer. Jack's eyes scanned the dense forest around them, his hand instinctively clutching the alien woman, still nestled in his palm. He had become acutely aware of how fragile she was, how much he relied on her trust to guide their path forward. And yet, despite the fear that gripped him, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for them, a force stronger than just the warlord's men, something more dangerous, something that would test their resolve in ways they hadn't imagined. But even as Jack's thoughts raced, he knew one thing for sure. They couldn't stop now. Not when they were so close. They had to make it to that base. They had to outrun the warlord's forces. And most importantly, they had to ensure that the alien woman's survival was more than just a fleeting hope. It was their future, her future. The sudden hum of a ship overhead snapped Jack from his thoughts. The sound wasn't just the faint background noise of an aircraft. It was the unmistakable, low-frequency vibration that signaled the approach of something massive. Jack's blood ran cold as the familiar silhouette of the warlord's ship loomed through the trees above them. It wasn't just any enemy ship. It was the one that had been chasing them, the one that carried the very warlord she had fled from. The alien woman's body tensed in Jack's hand. She had sensed it too. Her tiny frame shivered, and her large eyes flickered with a mixture of fear and recognition. Jack tightened his grip on her, instinctively pulling her closer to his chest as he crouched low, trying to stay hidden. The ship hovered just above the treetops, its dark, angular form casting an imposing shadow over the forest floor. Jack could hear the ship's engines now, their deep hum vibrating through the air as it slowed its descent. His heart pounded in his chest as he scanned the sky, trying to find a way out, a place to hide. "They're here," the alien woman whispered, her voice barely audible in the thick silence that had enveloped the forest. "They found us. It's too late." Jack's mind raced, but he knew he couldn't let panic take hold. He had to think, and he had to think fast. He looked around desperately, eyes searching for cover, for a way to move without being seen. But the forest was open, the trees too sparse for a proper hideout. The ship was closing in fast, and soon they would be in its line of sight. With no time to lose, Jack turned and bolted, his feet pounding against the soft earth as he made a break for a nearby ravine. The alien woman clung to him, her tiny hands wrapping around his fingers for support as he sprinted through the trees. There was no hesitation now. Jack's instincts took over as he pushed his body harder, his only focus on reaching safety, on reaching the base that was still so far away. Behind them, the sound of the ship's engines grew louder, and Jack knew that they wouldn't have long before it would drop down, scanning the area. The warlord's forces were relentless. They had technology that could track them no matter how carefully they tried to hide. The alien woman had warned him that her enemies were far more advanced than anything he had ever encountered. And now Jack was beginning to see just how true that was. His breath came in ragged gasps as he reached the edge of the ravine. He quickly scanned the area for a way down, his eyes searching for anything that could offer them shelter or a quick escape. But the moment his feet hit the edge, a beam of light shot down from the hovering ship, blasting through the trees with terrifying precision. The ground beneath Jack's feet trembled as the beam sliced through the forest, forcing him to jump back to avoid being caught in its path. The alien woman gasped in terror as the beam passed dangerously close to them. Jack barely managed to stay on his feet as he shielded her with his body, his muscles tensing with fear. They were so close to being discovered, so close to being trapped. The warlord's ship continued to hover overhead, sending out pulses of light that searched for any sign of movement. Jack's mind raced. There was no way they could outrun this, no way they could escape undetected. And then, in that moment of desperation, something unexpected happened. The alien woman stirred in his palm, her tiny form glowing faintly as she closed her eyes in concentration. Jack felt a sudden shift in the air around them, as though a force was pulling at the environment itself. The warlord's ship, despite its advanced technology, seemed to falter for just a brief second. The pulsing beam of light wavered in its intensity, missing its mark and veering off course. Jack watched in awe as the alien woman's body radiated an otherworldly energy, her eyes still shut tightly as she focused. The ship above them seemed to lose its precision, its scanners failing to find them. It was as if the alien woman was manipulating the very fabric of the atmosphere, bending it to her will. Jack's heart raced in a mixture of awe and fear. He had never seen anything like this before. Her power, her ability to affect the world around her with such subtlety, was beyond anything he could comprehend. But in that moment, he knew one thing. The warlord's forces had underestimated her. And now she was showing them just how powerful she truly was. But even as the ship faltered, Jack knew this was just a temporary reprieve. The enemy would soon adapt, and they couldn't rely on this trick for long. They had to keep moving, had to use this moment of weakness to escape. Jack didn't hesitate. He grabbed the alien woman gently but firmly, tucking her safely inside his jacket as he sprinted toward the ravine, hoping that this would be enough to give them the edge they needed. As he descended into the darkness of the ravine, Jack could feel the warlord's ship closing in once more. But now, for the first time, Jack wasn't running just to survive. He was running to fight, and he would make sure that the alien woman's strength would not go to waste. Love knows no size. The ravine was deep, the ground beneath Jack's boots treacherous as he carefully navigated the rocky terrain. Every step felt like a battle, each footfall taking them further from the warlord's pursuit, yet closer to an uncertain fate. The alien woman, nestled securely within the folds of his jacket, was silent now, her earlier energy spent. Jack could feel the weight of her fragile form, the warmth of her trust, and the quiet strength she had shown, even in the face of the unimaginable horrors she had endured. The air around them was still, too still, as if the world was holding its breath. The sun had begun to rise, casting long shadows across the jagged cliffs. But Jack knew that dawn didn't mean safety. It only meant that the warlord's forces would be even more relentless now, more determined to find their quarry. He had no illusions. The fight wasn't over. But in the quiet of the ravine, Jack found something unexpected. Hope. He had protected her. They had survived the pursuit. They had outsmarted the enemy. They were not alone in this battle. They had each other. Jack crouched low, his eyes scanning the horizon as he adjusted the alien woman in his hand. The military base, the last beacon of hope, was still far ahead. But for now, they were safe. They had a small, fragile window of peace, and Jack wasn't about to waste it. The alien woman stirred in his palm, her tiny fingers pressing against his hand as if to assure him she was still there, still with him. She looked up at him, her gaze soft and filled with gratitude. Yet something deeper was reflected in her eyes, something that went beyond mere survival. She hadn't spoken much since their escape, but now, as the tension of the chase began to settle into something calmer, she found her voice. "I never thought I would find someone like you," she whispered, her voice a soft breath against the cool morning air. "Someone who would care, who would fight for me." Jack's chest tightened, not from the weight of her words, but from the quiet truth that settled between them. Her voice, though small, was full of a deep emotion that cut through the tension of the past days. He had always known he was doing the right thing, protecting her, keeping her alive. But hearing her say it out loud, in the raw simplicity of her gratitude, made everything more real. "I'm not the hero you think I am," Jack replied, his voice rough with sincerity. "I'm just a soldier, but I couldn't let them take you. Not after everything you've been through." The alien woman's eyes softened, her tiny form trembling slightly in his hand. "You are more than a soldier to me," she whispered. "You are my protector, my friend, my family." Jack felt a lump in his throat as he looked down at her, his heart heavy with a mix of emotion. In the short time they had spent together, this small, fragile being had changed his life in ways he couldn't fully understand. They had come from different worlds, different realities, but in this moment, the bond between them was undeniable, undeniable in its strength. She had shown him what true courage was, the courage to survive, the courage to trust, and above all, the courage to love. It didn't matter that they were from different planets, different species. What mattered was that they were standing together, side by side, in a fight for a future neither of them had ever imagined. The warlord's forces, relentless as they were, hadn't won. They hadn't broken them. And now, they were closer than ever to the final step, making it to safety, to a new beginning. Jack's hand tightened around the tiny woman, his heart swelling with determination. "We're almost there. We just need to keep going. We'll make it." She looked up at him, her expression soft and filled with trust. "Together, we can do anything." And with that, something shifted between them. The tension of the past few days, the relentless pursuit, the fear of being captured, it all faded into the background. In its place stood something stronger, something more enduring. Hope. Hope for the future, hope for freedom, hope for a life beyond the warlord's reach. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Jack took one last look at the horizon, where the military base awaited them. The journey wasn't over, not by a long shot, but they had made it this far. They had faced the darkness together, and now it was time for the light. The alien woman, small in his hand but fierce in spirit, was not alone anymore. Neither of them were. "Let's go," Jack said, his voice filled with quiet certainty. And together, with hearts bound by a shared resolve, they began the final leg of their journey. They had fought, survived, and now they would thrive. The warlord's empire would fall, and her people would rise again. Not because of any grand weapon, not because of any army, but because love, strong, unwavering, and unbreakable, had conquered all. And in the end, love knows no size.